This is our BC First People's final project by Jacob Waddell, Aiden Rice, and Jacob Schmidt. And joining us, we have Harlan. And we're going to be talking about what we think are the big ideas in reconciliation. I chose to go into awareness and how that relates to reconciliation. First, I'd like to talk about violence and about missing and murdered Canadian Indigenous women and why we need to bring awareness to this. Between 1983 to 2003, there was more than 61 missing persons in Vancouver, on the east side, and half were Indigenous women. The stat alone shows that this issue needs to be brought to light, considering that was really only just in the city. Um, it's also a part of reconciliation in that Canada already has a history with the killings of Aboriginal peoples in general, and if as a country, if we want to make up for this, we need to spread awareness to this issue. Now I'm gonna talk about some ways people in BC have spread awareness to this issue. They've done this through campaigns, protests, and even art. Some examples are the Moose Hide campaign. This was started in 2011 and was done sort of based on how on the Highway of Tears, many Indigenous women went missing, and the whole thing was Moosehide was given to men to promote nonviolence and to raise awareness of the responsibility of men. And the goal was sort of to, instead of hiding it, opening about and addressing violence. And there was the Women's March, February 14th. This happens in Vancouver, BC. The march involves specific protocols and involves many members in the Indigenous community. The purpose of the march is to remember and honor the lives of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Then there was the Red Dress Project, created by Jamie Black in response to the large amount of missing and murdered Indigenous women. It involves hanging red dresses in the environment. Red was chosen because it is said red is the only color spirits can see. So the color is really calling back to the spirits of these women, allowing them to be among us and their relatives and loved ones. Um, Now, the reason why it's primarily Indigenous women is because over history they've sort of become easy targets in a way, and it's mainly because of how they grew up and in their environments. They didn't have a lot growing up, and they didn't really have any kind of support or role models, and they just sort of, you know, naturally got into drugs and alcohol and sort of continued down that rabbit hole. And it also doesn't help, throughout history, Indigenous people just have been treated sort of as lesser. Main example being residential schools, which means even police don't like to shed light. Well, didn't at least like to shed light into this area.
So, do you think that the government is doing enough about this situation?
No, no, the one above.
Oh, fuck. Okay, well, do you think there's enough being done considering this issue of violence?
No, I do not think there is enough being done, especially how quickly in the last 10 years we're able to spread information across social media. Obviously, there's people spreading awareness, but clearly not enough. According to the statistic in 2021, 4.1 Aboriginal per 100,000 Aboriginal women in Canada were murdered, compared to 0.8 non-Aboriginal women per 100,000 non-Aboriginal women were murdered. I know it sort of seems like a small statistic, but it's actually 5 times more murdered Aboriginal women than non-Aboriginal women. And
Do you think the government's doing enough?
obviously not proven by the statistic, especially, you'd expect more for them as well because they are sort of the sole reason for Indigenous problems in Canada.
Well, what do you
Uh,
think they could be doing about the situation considering they're not really doing anything?
Well, they are the government, so they do have access to all, public media and just on all those platforms. So it should be pretty easy. Harlan, I'll ask you a question.
Okay.
In what ways could you spread awareness, to this violence issue in everyday life, do you think?
In what ways? Um, I think social media is a good start. Of course, I'm sure a lot of other um, groups of individuals like attempting to shed light to this have also gone through social media, but I think that's really the big starting point where a lot of this should come from. Uh, yeah, it's a good way to spread whatever, really, right? So I mean, shedding light on that part would be probably the best choice.
Yeah, I agree with Harlan. I think that like a lot of what you see is mainly done through social media, whether that be TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, any of those things. But that is it is one of the most like widely consumed platforms of entertainment. So I think that if you were to advocate and promote on these platforms, it would reach a wide and very broad audience, which is
It's really
exactly
like
what you're
everyone
looking for.
everyone in the world can see it. Like you got news, like Instagram, TikTok, everything. Like there's not really anywhere you can't see social media.
Yeah. And there's not really even like an excuse. Like it just should be done. Like in general, like it's so easy to do.
Like it happens with everyone else. Like why do they just turn a blind eye to indigenous groups?
All right. I'm gonna talk about stereotypes next. Towards indigenous peoples, and how they're sort of targeted toward them in everyday life, and it can make them feel unwelcome and unaccepted in society, and that if we want to reconcile, we need to bring awareness to this issue and stop using them. Some examples of these stereotypes are the drunken Indian, or like the wise elder, or just like the name Indian in general, which isn't really supposed to be used, and is considered sort of a derogatory term in today's world. Some ways we can bring awareness to this issue is sort of, as I said, in everyday life. Like, say, for example, you're like at a family dinner, someone uses, someone obviously not in our generation uses a stereotypical term, just correcting them and explaining how, that can make an indigenous person feel unwelcome. And especially, again, on top of social media having a significant impact on everyone's lives, in today's world, we can use this to spread awareness rapidly. How do we stop it? In my opinion, in the long run, it's just about sort of educating the youth, because they're gonna be the future, right?
The next
And
generation.
yeah, and if we can do that and carry that information towards the next generation, it will be stopped further on. Do you notice any common stereotypes towards indigenous people used in your everyday life?
Um, I yeah, I'd say that there are a lot of I've definitely seen and heard and met a lot of people who are very like set on the stereotypes and that's what they
Yeah.
believe. They don't take the time to learn about the stereotypes. They just
But then
kinda
again, like sometimes it's just how you were raised. Like sometimes you
Yeah,
just hear
exactly.
those kinds of terms like all the time, and you don't really know anything else. So like,
right, but you also
Yeah,
have to be
that's
like
why that's what I mean. It's sort of a generational thing. Like,
but you also want like sure you can be raised like that, but you would also want to, be wanting to learn
yeah, like sure you
about
were raised like that, but it doesn't hurt to like to learn the new generation of like terms. Like obviously you don't want to keep using derogatory terms if like that's not what you want to hear in like
right.
public. Like obviously not everyone's gonna know how you were raised, so you can't just think it's okay to say whatever you want.
I want to talk about how indigenous people how they respected their land and how they gave back to the land and just how they respect their community and give back to their community and how that all goes around. One of the main points is like their land in general and what they think about their land.
Like in indigenous like cultures, how would they steward the land?
Well, they'd steward the land by like they'd forage from it, and then they'd make sure that they would always replant the seeds of whatever plant they took or whatever fungus they took. They made sure that when they went hunting for animals, they respected the animal after they killed it, and they used every body part for something, and made sure that it was all used. So, when they would, cut down a tree, they would make sure that, there were no other animals in or around the tree, and they made sure that when they cut it down or when they took bark from the tree that it was, like a lone tree. They made sure that it was like the right one to take, and they took that very seriously around how they, like, around what they would take from Mother Earth. They'd only take as much as they need.
So how they treat the land and all.
Uh-huh.
Do you think that is done enough today? And do you think we should, like, besides indigenous cultures, should like have that respect for land? And do you think doing that could sort of be a part of reconciliation?
Oh, absolutely. I think that if more people respected the land and gave back to the land, not even to the land itself, to others as well, then we would have an ultimately more holistic way of life as humans. Only taking what we need and
Sort of like cherishing like everything we have.
cherishing and making sure that we replant and we, do all of the things correctly, just enough to,
Yeah.
We're not overusing or overdoing or harming the land in any way. And the same can also go for people as well. How, like, if you gain something from someone or someone gives you something, you want to give back to them and you want to show them respect. So, like, an example would be if say someone, like, someone did something nice for you. They got you a hamburger at McDonald's because you guys are at McDonald's.
Yeah.
The next time you guys are hanging out and you see a shop, you could offer and say, hey, do you want a hamburger from that shop? And that's just a way to respect and reciprocate what you gain from, or what you what you're giving out, what you receive.
Like a two-way deal, like
Yeah.
you.
So, yeah, but that's just one aspect of it too. They gained a lot of knowledge from the land as well, and how they did that was through like stars in the sky and cycles of animal breedings and whatnot. And they just gained all this knowledge from the land, and they want to give back to the land for the knowledge that they gained. So they use the knowledge that they gain to give back to the land.
Yeah. I think even if we like you said, like how they sort of I don't know, like how they sort of farmed and treated the land, how they sort of like, their diet, almost like their diets and how they got food. Honestly, that I think it'd result in a much healthier lifestyle, just overall. Because I remember, I don't know if I'm like correct on this, but I remember hearing about how like before settlers came, like First Nations were like in peak condition, and then when settlers came and they brought all this processed food over from like Europe and stuff, it sort of just deteriorated.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and how like when like settlers came in, they really put a halt and stunted this respect that they were giving and receiving, and they just took and took and took and never gave back, and then it created a poison for the earth, and now it's not going too well.
You say their relationship was heavily spiritual. How so?
So the relationship with the land wasn't just a physical. It wasn't just you give me the seeds and you give me the herbs and the fruit that I need to live, and I continue your life, right? Your generations as a plant. It was also spiritual as well, and how the First Nations really connected with the forest. They don't claim ownership of the earth, but they claim a sense of like stewardship, a sense of like, they're a handmaid for the earth and for all of its creatures as well. a lot of it is directly connected to spirit.
So, on topic of like reconciliation, sort of with the, the whole spiritual thing and how how like indigenous cultures obviously use that as it's a big part of their culture, right? Do you think, like, do you think we even recognize that stuff enough? Like, do you think people outside indigenous culture even take that in like consideration and respect that?
Oh, absolutely not. But it's a lot of the time it's people who you can find. You'll find good people anywhere, but they don't really pay attention to how it was done and how it should be done to continue this way of life. But it's just become a crutch for so many people at this point, where like anybody, like online shopping. Online shopping
Yep.
is one of the, like, it's probably one of the worst polluters, right? Because of all the factories in India and China that are just pumping stuff out into the air, and then all the planes that need to transport all the goods, and the trucks that need to move them, all because you want that plastic plant for the bathroom or something, right? It's it's just it's not a very pollution free way of life, the one that we have now, and it would be very, very difficult to go back. Another topic I want to just kind of finish up with is colonization, and how we as non-indigenous people can give land back to indigenous people, just because of how colonization worked and how we took their land from them and we forced them onto reserves, so that because we saw how connected they were with the land, so we forced relocation onto reserves, and we introduced patriarchal governance such as the Indian Act chiefs, breaking the starvation of traditional resources such as buffalo massacres, and breaking family units and knowledge through residential schools. And we all of these are connected. Limiting the access to land, like cultural land practices and whatnot, are just some of like the terrible things.
Last example. What do you think we need to do to stop it? Sorry, reconcile. Like, what do you think we need to do, especially like from a reserve sort of standpoint and the Indian Act? What do you think can be done? Like, do you think we need to do something? Do you think the government needs to be something?
I think that
what is it?
I think that what really needs to happen is, like traditional land needs to be given back, right? How, like, they have their reserves, and we've gone in a good direction, recognizing the land that we're on and recognizing that it's not ours and that we took it. But I think if we gave it back and stopped, all these horrible polluting things, then it would definitely help a lot. But I'd say that, so like, the government can only do so much. There are some like stuck ups that won't cooperate and whatnot.
Yeah, because I was just gonna say, like,
Not everyone's gonna want to move, right?
like, yeah, say like our school even,
Mm-hmm.
it's on unceded territory of the Solo Nation.
Right.
So we already have the school like built on this land. If say we were to give it back, then what happens with the schooling? Like, how could we get around that?
Well, it would just, and that's that's one of the like most difficult things to really go by, is you can't. I personally, I don't know what the best option would really be for that, but I think that
Yeah,
if
like,
yeah, it's hard to say, but I think that if we changed kind of how it goes for a little bit, like how how things function on the land and kind of what should be put there and what should be taken away within some degree of measure, then
You're right, because I guess it does kind of it all ends up to like the decision of the nation. Like, if they're okay with the
Right.
school, I'm sure they understand, but we just still have to recognize that it wasn't our territory in the first place.
right. Harlan, as someone who hasn't taken the course, what do you see in in your everyday life that could be solved or helped with the implication of giving back to the land, respecting the land, and respecting others, and all that?
And all that. Honestly, there's not too much, I guess, harm towards Native people in my jurisdiction of life. I live next to the River Cree Casino, which is owned by a Native family. Um, there, no one's homeless. I don't see homeless people walking down my street all too much. That are natives. Um, Overall, there's not much of a huge impact on my part, or not on my part. In the area that I live in and I go to, the places I am, I don't see much of a huge impact of where that I am. But I am in a different province, of course, and there's different laws and regulations everywhere. But I'm sure as I go into the city or other places within my own province, I would see um, byproducts of whatever, like residential schools and whatnot, right? So
Yeah, the works of that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the topic I researched for this project was the acknowledging of Indigenous rights in society. I chose this topic because since we've gone over it in class, it really sparked interest in my mind, and I just had a lot of questions that I wanted answers. And so, like, one of the questions that arose from my mind was like, why are Indigenous rights so important in a society or community? And like, obviously, everyone in the community deserves rights and their own free will, but before the Constitution Act of 1982, Aboriginal rights existed as a part of common law, yet the government could and did extinguish Indigenous rights at will. In many of these instances, First Nations rights were neglected.
How did colonization impact indigenous ways of life?
So, like, colonization impacted all aspects of life for living Aboriginal peoples, including government assimilation, health, traditional roles, culture, like economic conditions, access to services, and equity among groups. And like many traditions and ways of life faded away. And like even today, Aboriginal people suffer from health inequities and like not being able to connect with their own culture and like families. Yet, settlers created some positive opportunities as well for First Peoples. Not just positive, but like also negatives. But the positives were really drowned out by negatives, including like Indigenous peoples getting hit with a wave of like diseases, laws, wars, and just outright taking up their lands, which rendered them unable to produce foods and like were put under a lot of oppression by Europeans. But do you guys have like any questions?
So my question is, what rights do indigenous people have that are different or not, like racist, let's say?
I think what Aiden's trying to say is like, what rights do you think could be seen as racist in a way towards indigenous peoples that we have?
I guess so. Since there's reserves, I guess that like the fact that some indigenous peoples have to be living on reserves is just kind of that's pretty racist to me. Like indigenous people should be able to live like wherever they want and not have to be limited to reserves, like and like shop on reserves. Like they should be able to go wherever they want.
But can't they
And,
already?
like,
yeah, they can already.
Yeah, like they can, but some of them are just so far down already from like
I see.
years of like intergenerational trauma that they can't build up any like wealth or like enough money to actually be able to move away from a reserve.
I see. That. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're relying on the policies of the reserve in order.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Like
I see.
get out.
Exactly, like not being able to dig
Yeah,
yourself
right.
out because
Right,
of
because-
like
because
things that
of
have happened in the
yeah, because of
past that you just
trauma.
can't help. You just can't help it. Like
Right.
it's
So-
just the family you were born into.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, like multi-generational impact. Like especially you see, I think it relates to stereotypes as well. Especially you see like, people being called like drunken Indian, and it's being like even represented in movies and stuff.
Yeah.
And but there's a reason. There's obviously a reason these have sort of been brought about, and it's just kind of sad because they can't really do anything about it. It's just it's a multi-generational thing, and you see like people, especially indigenous people, with all these like mental issues and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. But like
Yeah,
settlers.
I've got a question of my own here.
Okay.
What role, like in say a city, what role do Native people play, in the bigger picture of expanding a city or the income of a city?
Well, really, taking into account that everyone is equal, they should all have the exact same opportunities as everyone else to like contribute to a city. Like coming up into this new age with reconciliation, like before, say, indigenous people didn't have the same rights and like they weren't counted as equal before. Now they'll like be able to have the same opportunities as everyone else, in my opinion. Like there shouldn't be any like lesser or more than in a society.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not really in a sense like it's they could do anything about it at the time.
Exactly,
It's just,
like
it's what the what
it's what
how
the
they be
laws
treated.
were enabling them to what they can and can't do. Okay, but anyway, that kind of goes in with my next topic, which is how settlers were like much more advanced than first peoples, so it wasn't hard for them to abuse their power.
Right.
And like in the abusing of their power, it led to decades and even centuries of a divide between communities that we see today. And like even today, where reconciliation still needs to be completed, but if you think about it, reconciliation wouldn't even have to be necessary, because if in the past we had just recognized that everyone is different and has their own views and culture and just a
Right.
diversity
The-
in
Yeah, there's something.
culture.
There's something I want to bring up about that. How
Yeah.
settlers were more advanced. So, like in the past, with how this is relating to my topic. Back to my topic.
Yeah.
So, like, you'd say, oh well, why wouldn't the First Nations, like, why wouldn't they start inventing things? Why wouldn't they, like, do all that? And what I have here, I'm gonna quote the First Nations Pediology here. Balance and holistic harmony are essential tenets of this knowledge and subsequent cultural practices. Embedded too is a keen belief in both adaptability and change, but change that further promotes balance and harmony, not change that creates distress, death, and the depletion of Earth's population and resources. End quote. So you can even hear there how like they're not. They wouldn't make things that would kill or make things other than to, hunt, right?
Just what they need, like
Right.
they're only the resources that they need. Like
Right, but that's just like that. Like that's why they only want to make what they need to make, and only
exactly.
want to do like change and make better ways to just be more in touch spiritually and physically with the earth and with their land.
And that also takes into like the opposition, like the settlers, Europeans, like making weapons that are much more advanced because they're just taking more than what they need instead of like
Yeah.
indigenous communities where they take only what they need.
Yeah. Anyways, Jacob, back to you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that in the past, if we had recognized that everyone is different and assimilation isn't the right way, then today we have a much more how do I put this? Like we'd be more together as a planet even. Like everyone on this planet would be more in a community instead of just separated into multiple different ones.
Right.
Yeah,
But
I
y'all-
feel like. Sorry. Yeah.
No, you can go.
I feel like we, like throughout history, we've sort of tried to almost push indigenous culture away, but really,
Yeah.
we can learn a lot from them.
Lessons.
Yeah,
we can
take
get
lessons.
lessons
We
and
can
Yeah.
more
gain their
understanding.
knowledge.
Yeah, we shouldn't be trying to like push them away. We should probably we need to get more.
Take into account what they're saying and like
Yeah.
why they're the things that they say are important.
It's like they have some. I mean, they're people, right? And they obviously
Exactly.
prove they have they have their own way of living, and it's proved in the past. Before settlers came, obviously that it was obviously a very healthy lifestyle. Sorry, back to what like England was doing with the land and all that. And it was like we can like I said, we can learn stuff from them.
Do you
Yeah,
have
and
a
you may-
specific example as to what we could learn from them in
Yeah.
modern day?
I think so, especially with I think with diets. I think I mentioned before how before settlers came, sort of indigenous cultures and peoples were like in peak condition just because how they treated the land. They took what they needed, right? They grew they grew natural resources like foods and stuff, and that resulted in just a healthier way of living. So I think we can honestly, especially with all the processed foods today, just implementing that to like everyday life, I think would be
And really taking into account the traditional foods that they make, which are like much more high nutrient, like
Yeah.
more nutrition, but that also take into account that sometimes they take more, how do I say this, like take more effort to obtain.
Yep.
But then again, it gives you more of like a nutritional value.
But also, you say it takes more effort to attain, but it also creates, connection with the land, and that's sort of part of their culture.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we can even introduce that into our, like, that could be part of our culture as well. Like, it doesn't just have to be. I don't know. I've always wondered like why it's such a separate thing. I just don't never like why can't
Yeah.
it be included?
Exactly. Because you could also ask like, why or so what? Like, why do we care about indigenous rights now? But like, we also have to take into the table like equality and not to treat anyone indifferently or with disrespect. Because
Yeah.
like, if you think of it from their perspective, they had what's rightfully theirs taken,
Mm-hmm.
and if like you walk a mile in their shoes, obviously you'd want what's yours back too.
Yeah.
Because like, indigenous rights contain like sophisticated knowledge about the natural world and like the control they had over lands and like how they flourish in those ecosystems. Like they have a much more like expanded knowledge over the land than we do because they take so much like effort to actually understand it.
No, I'd like to ask, especially, Harlan, because he's, obviously the whole thing is passing on information to others.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, of course.
What is one thing that you really, that's from like what all of us said that sort of stood out to you, and what do you
And,
think?
like, yeah.
What would you see that was like most significant? Like,
What stuck with you? What really
Yeah.
stuck with you throughout this whole
In
thing?
this conversation here, you guys?
Just
Yeah.
like the whole thing.
just
Yeah.
the whole thing,
Oh,
yeah, like
Everything that we talked about
And
so
so,
far.
Yeah.
what's resided the most with you?
Honestly, a lot. Not really any specifics, just because everything you guys went on about was very factual, obviously, and very
Interconnected.
And like
Yeah.
eye-opening.
intertwined, yeah, and eye-opening. Yeah. So overall, I mean, I'm glad I was able to be here to experience this with you guys, because a lot of the stuff here I didn't know prior, so I'm
Yeah.
glad.
What
I,
is oh sorry what is one of the like what is one of the things that you like, just one thing that you've taken away, one thing that you
Oh, so
you've learned?
you would like a specific?
Yeah.
Yeah, like one thing. Yeah, just
Definitely
about it.
the reservations. That kind of
Yeah.
stuck with me because I'm right beside one essentially.
Mm.
And so just hearing about that and how a lot of people's have to rely off that solely and without really much of a choice about it is probably one of, if not the biggest thing I took away from this, just because how, I guess, intertwined I am with it, right?
well, that makes sense.
Yeah,
We-
that's kind of all I really had to say. So
Yeah, so I guess we're probably going to wrap it up here, but
yeah.
this is our take. This is what we think is just, I mean, there's like, you really got to think the bigger picture of reconciliation is
such a broad topic,
It's such a
like-
broad,
Mhm.
it's so big that we can't cover it in we've been going for about an hour now.
Yeah.
It's just such a broad
Yeah, like,
topic that we can't cover it all, but I think
just
that,
the things we've talked about aren't the only topics that we could have
Mhm.
talked about. Like there's so much of a broader information that we could have talked about.
Right. But yeah, I'm glad that we got to talk about this, and we're going to wrap this up now. Harlan, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for
Yeah,
sitting
thank
through
you, man.
Thanks
this.
for having me.
Yeah, of course.